just kind of the overview of the ethical and religious directives, and there's some copies on the table there if you don't have it. It's also available online. And a little bit of just context of Catholic healthcare, and especially locally. So this DVD was made the 125th anniversary of the hospital, I think 2011 or 12 or whatever it was. And it started out supposed to be a 10-minute video. I'm not sure how big it got. It's not real long. But you might see some familiar faces in here from people that are still in our community who worked at the hospital in years past and now are retired. But some are parishioners here. Some of you might recognize from elsewhere. And then next week to talk a little bit about ethics in general. There's a lot of different ethical theories out there, and about half of the literature in healthcare ethics is about the search for principles. Where should we start? What should be our fundamental commitments? What is our framework? Catholic healthcare has this advantage because we've got 2,000 years of magisterial history and the scriptures and so on. So we've got a little bit of a head start with that. We have much in common with, I'll just call it secular healthcare ethics, although there's some distinctive differences. And then after the next few weeks, we'll kind of dive into particular directives of the ethical and religious directives. There's 6 parts, as you'll see. And particularly to focus on, probably for each section, one issue that's a little bit more controversial in our day. Disputed questions, they call them in the Middle Ages. Good evening.
Hello.
And so, for instance, the sexual assault protocol. What can be done for a woman who has been a victim of sexual assault and is concerned that she may be pregnant? End of life issues we talked about. We had an ethics consult today that was really quite challenging because of linguistic, cultural, and religious differences. So we come at our perspective on healthcare ethics from kind of a Western philosophical tradition. Not everybody that we serve shares that same background. So that can create some difficulties. Beginning of life issues, we can talk a little bit, there's a few areas there. In vitro fertilization and what are those limits of what we can do to assist with procreation, as well as some of the issues around neonatal care and viability, and what we do for a very sick mother and child at a very early stage of pregnancy. And then part 6 is the one where I probably spend a lot of time, and the diocese right now is spending a fair amount of time, as we look at the growth of a system like Centricare, and how does a Catholic and a non-Catholic entity work together to preserve Catholic identity but not impose Catholic identity on those who don't share our values. So we'll come to all of that. But we'll start praying together. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Gracious God, we thank you for this day. We thank you for those who devote themselves to healing and care, especially those who care for loved ones in their own homes and families, that we might know how best to support them and to bring peace and healing to those who perhaps cannot be cured, but seek some experience of God's mercy in their lives. Guide us in our conversation. Help us to hear your Holy Spirit speak into our lives. Together we pray, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Now we can do introductions again because our numbers have doubled.
Sorry, my name's Tamara William, from Freeport, Minnesota.
God bless
I got a little turned around
It's quite all right. Happened to be the first time I tried to find my own parish here. So welcome.
Thank you.
And can I ask your background, or are you
Yes,
in
I'm
healthcare?
actually coming from, I do work for Century Care.
Ah, okay.
So I've been having mixed emotions about a lot of things in the last 3 years.
Okay.
So I'm here hopefully to help with that.
Yeah. The questions are always welcome.
Okay.
And are you a PA or a nurse?
I'm a nurse. RN, yeah.
Can I ask what area? Are you
I'm in infection control now,
Ah,
and I was in the full pool before that, and ortho before that, nursing homes before that, and I can just keep going.
wonderful. Well, I was once spirit. Did you know Sally Trusky?
I've heard of her. I knew she was an infection preventionist.
Yeah, she
when
was
I
at the
was there.
hospital.
Yeah, but she was long gone before I moved into this position.
So she convinced me to foam in and foam out.
Oh, good.
My life has gotten much better since then.
Awesome.
I'm Christy Coble. I'm an RN. My background, let's see, I worked for a major medical center, a level 1 trauma center for 16 years. I've done public health, I've done camp nursing. Right now I'm doing assisted living and memory care. I've done med surge. The only thing I haven't done is OBGYN.
Is
OBGYN.
oh,
Otherwise, my background's been more adult, general. So, and then also to a top nursing.
And I have a non-medical background, unless you count putting Band-Aids on little kids. I'm Gary Kidon, I'm a parishioner here at Sacred Heart, I'm the parish council. I do various other things.
Your Band-Aids are magic, just so you know.
yes.
Those Band-Aids on kids are magic.
Especially the real colorful ones.
Yep. I ended up with a bunch of, I can't even remember what they were called anymore. They were pictures of little girls, really skinny. But my granddaughter outgrew them, so I still have some.
And I'm Janet Doucette. I work for the Marriage and Family Office for the diocese. So I'm here just because I'm interested in healthcare. But I don't have a background. Just purely interested in the topic.
Yeah, well, and we come with a diversity of backgrounds, and that enriches the conversation. So I'm Father Tom Knoblach. I'm the consultant for healthcare ethics for the diocese, and this all started when I was out plowing snow in the parking lot in Wadena, and the parish secretary came running out and said, "The bishop's on the phone and would like to talk to you." We had an old Jeep Grand Cherokee. Every time you'd hit the snowbank, like another 5 pounds of rust would fall out. So he asked me to go to grad school and get a degree in healthcare ethics. This was in 1997, and I think he saw that healthcare was changing, the technology was evolving, the social norms were evolving around this. Century Care was fairly new at that time, so in '94, and some of those challenges about keeping Catholic identity alive in a growing system. And so I don't think I was the first person he asked, but I was the first person that said yes. So I went to St. Louis University and got a doctorate in healthcare ethics there. We were only the second year of this new PhD program. I learned a lot. So the first semester was healthcare organizations, healthcare law, and introduction to medicine for ethicists. So we had an ER doc, a hospital attorney, and some guy who had a MBA and had been in healthcare administration. I was absolutely lost. And then the second semester was philosophy, theology, and I forget some other discipline that felt quite comfortable. And we had a really rich cohort. So we had a cardiac surgeon, several nurses, a couple of people, man and woman in religious life, a couple of attorneys, couple hospital administrators, and there were, I think, 2 priests kind of in my boat as well. And we really enriched each other in that conversation because some of us knew things that others didn't. And his whole idea was to provide kind of a, thank you, forgot I ran those off. These are the slides. A kind of a community of scholars was the idea. So I ended up writing about Dietrich von Hildebrand, the German philosopher, Alzheimer's disease and postmodern culture, and the intersection of those 3 on an ethic of reverence. It was the ideal thing because almost no one had heard of von Hildebrand. Even postmodern scholars couldn't decide what postmodernity is, and nobody knows exactly what causes Alzheimer's, and there's no cure for it. So they could ask me anything, and nobody knew more than I did. We're all learning together. So I learned a lot in that process. And then when I came back to the diocese, it's about almost 23 years I've been involved with the hospital and the ethics committee and the members of the corporation, and learned to meet a remarkable array of really amazing people. So it's been a great enrichment for me. I want to start with this video, if you don't mind. This is just kind of an introduction to what Catholic healthcare is and has been for us locally. And you know, I imagine, that most healthcare in the United States was founded by religious communities and religious communities of women. So we'll come back to some of that broader history of healthcare in the United States. But locally, it was the Benedictine sisters. Well, Lapsus, I'll tell you the rest of that story. No. So why won't you just play? Would you think OK would do that? Got an insight?
There's something on the other.
Oh, I
There you
needed
go.
the other.
Other remote.
How come the volume isn't on the same one as well?
So the volumes for the TV and the other one for the HDMI.
Thank you, Serena.
On April 14, 1886, a powerful tornado whipped through central Minnesota. It moved through the city of St. Cloud, flattening buildings and scouring the landscape. Whole city blocks were devastated. Then it jumped the Mississippi River and virtually destroyed the larger community of Sauk Rapids on the eastern banks. When it was over, 72 people lay dead. 213 were injured. But St. Cloud's Hospital was left standing, and it became a beacon of hope for the shocked population. The dedication and competence displayed by Benedictine sisters who staffed the hospital was exemplary. Until relief came from nearby towns and the Twin Cities, these women worked 48 straight hours to care for those injured in the disaster. It was a dramatic test for the fledgling hospital in a town where residents had been unconvinced of the worth of a permanent hospital. But the people took a second, favorable look get the question when they saw how effectively St. Benedict's Hospital staff responded to the crisis, to neighbors and friends and members of their own families.
Too much cannot be said in praise of the self-sacrificing sisters of St. Benedict. The providential escape of the hospital gave our poor wounded a place of refuge, and the sisters in charge proved to be true angels of mercy. They've won the love and respect of every class and sect by their untiring labors of love and mercy. St. Cloud Times, April 1886.
Well, the attitudes at that time was that don't go into the hospital because that's where you die. And it was only after the tornado when people realized that if they did go to the hospital, they needed the care, they got good care, and they were discharged and went back to their home and continued to live a productive life. So little by little, the attitudes toward healthcare were beginning to develop to be a very positive one. It was a whole change for people's perceptions of what healthcare was to be.
The Sisters of the Order of St. Benedict in St. Joseph, Minnesota, had just opened the hospital in St. Cloud 2 months earlier, in February 1886. This was a new venture for the sisters. Benedictines follow a rule whose core is a life of prayer lived in community. Their work is determined by the needs of those who live nearby.
Well, the rule of Benedict, in addition to saying to do the work that is necessary in the area, the rule also says that the care of the sick is just vitally important, and the sick person is to be treated as Christ himself. So that really, in doing hospital work, really fits in very well with the Benedictine life and the Benedictine rule.
Benedictines typically look for people outside their membership to join their efforts. By 1889, on the front of healthcare alone, these Benedictine women opened and began operating not only the hospital in St. Cloud, but one in Bismarck, North Dakota, and another in Duluth. The sisters were making good on their declaration of intent to care for the sick of the region, enunciated in a letter to the St. Cloud City Council dated August 24th, 1882.
Gentlemen, a hospital is a desideratum long felt in the northern part of our state. The sick must now either be sent far away or must be lodged in miserable hovels not calculated to benefit them in soul or body. The necessity of building a hospital is evident. Have we a community to take charge of this enterprise? Yes. We, the Benedictine sisters who have labored in Stearns County 26 years, have concluded to devote ourselves to this sacred cause. Respectfully, Sisters of St. Benedict, August 24th, 1882.
The letter also asked for partnership from the city, moral support, and financial backing to help build a fine 3-story brick hospital in St. Cloud, where the conjunction of rivers and railroads promised thriving commercial enterprise and population growth. Though the council referred the Benedictines' proposal to a subcommittee for further study, the request eventually dropped from meeting minutes. In 1882, a young medical student emigrated from Montreal, Canada, and established residency in St. Cloud before leaving for Rush Medical College in Chicago to complete his studies. A.C. Lamont Ramsey returned to St. Cloud in 1884, excellently trained, having had the opportunity to study with some of the finest surgeons in the country. In September 1885, Ramsey opened a tiny 2-bed hospital, but within 3 months, learned he could not manage it and maintain his medical practice. He turned to the Benedictine sisters, asking if they would operate the hospital. Mother Scholastica Kirst, prioress of the Benedictine sisters, lost no time responding in the affirmative. For $2,000, she purchased a newly built house on what is now 9th Avenue North and had it modified to serve as a hospital that could accommodate 15 patients.
Mother Scholastica was a young person with a lot of energy. And if she had an idea, it probably was going to become fact. I think she was probably 8 or 9 years. And during that time, she started 17 schools. She built a hospital in Bismarck, North Dakota. She started the St. Cloud Hospital on 9th Avenue and expanded that. She did great things historically when we look at her legacy.
The March 3rd edition of the St. Cloud Times, just a week after the hospital's dedication, reported several patients being treated at the hospital for complicated medical problems requiring surgery. 2 were from Melrose, 1 from Perham, and another from Little Falls. Already, the advantage of having a good hospital in St. Cloud seemed clear, at least to some in the region. But as winter turned to spring, census at the hospital lagged. The Benedictines wondered if they had made a mistake. Then the tornado struck, erasing doubts. The hospital would not want for patients again because Dr. Ramsey and the sister nurses showed people that these were the qualities of care they could expect at St. Benedict's Hospital, even in a crisis. This heritage remains the distinctive character of hospital care in St. Cloud. Dr. Ramsey's stay in St. Cloud was too brief. He died September 28, 1891. Other doctors, also well-educated and highly motivated, continued to establish practices in St. Cloud and nearby towns. Physicians have been major drivers of the standard of care and resources available at St. Cloud's Hospital throughout its history. Through their initiative and generosity, they have demonstrated that the community's health is their chief concern. For about 80 years, the Benedictine sisters would own and operate St. Cloud's flourishing hospital, staffing it with skilled nurses and support personnel who were encouraged to see patients with St. Benedict's eyes, as if they were Christ. This is a perspective that asks nothing but the finest, kindest care for each person. The sisters' service to the hospital's mission and their influence on women and men who join in that service continues to this day. Hospital care at St. Cloud rapidly changed after those early days in the 1880s. Demand for hospital care jumped so sharply that in just 4 years after the 1886 tornado, the sisters built a new hospital east of the Mississippi. With accommodations for 30 patients, the new facility, St. Raphael's Hospital, was double the size of the old one. But by 1899, it was clear the hospital needed yet more space for patients and a more accessible location. The second St. Raphael's Hospital, built on 9th Avenue North next to the original hospital, featured 2 operating rooms and 50 patient beds. The vacated hospital building was immediately transformed into St. Joseph's Home for the Aged. St. Joseph's quickly filled to capacity, so without a doubt, it answered a genuine need in the area. The brand new St. Raphael's Hospital was dedicated May 26, 1900, and flung open its doors to the 20th century. In 1908, a year after Minnesota mandated that all nurses working in hospitals be licensed, St. Raphael's established its training school for nurses. Physicians were an integral part of the nursing school curriculum, responsible for lectures on medical topics. training school for nurses, augmented the hospital's nursing staff, and improved its quality of care. It also offered unmarried women, lay as well as religious, serviceable professional education. The school eventually would open its doors to men and married women, carrying on its tradition of nursing education for 79 years, until June 1987. Throughout the early decades of the 1900s, rapid change was the norm at the hospital. In 1918, for example, the Roman Catholic Church set aside its injunction against religious assisting women giving birth. That same year, Sister Kunigun Kiefler took charge of the maternity department at St. Raphael's. By 1920, the hospital had set up its first medical laboratory, and physicians had organized into a medical staff with compulsory monthly meetings where they reviewed case and death records. St. Raphael's Hospital was quite busy and cramped. When the Spanish influenza epidemic hit the St. Cloud area hard in 1918, it underscored how woefully inadequate St. Raphael's facilities had become.
We had to expand. We were just on top of one another. St. Raphael's was so crowded, patients were in the parlor and hallways. And we didn't have enough storage area. Sister Julita Hoppy, Hospital Chief Administrator, 1925.
The sisters, with the direction of the administrator, Sister Julita Hoppy, decided to build a hospital for the future of the community. The cathedral-like hospital, which opened in 1928, had 7 stories facing west and 10 facing east as the land sloped to the river. One local news reporter summed up the impact of the hospital this way.
St. Cloud Hospital will be more than merely a material and civic asset. The value of so great a scientific institution is beyond immediate comprehension. No expense has been too great, no detail too exacting, no requirement too difficult, if the end was to be excellence and completeness. And because these things have been done so well, the hospital is a thing almost animate. It lifts itself from the realm of steel and stone and wood into the world of service, because the Sisters of St. Benedict have endowed it with an individuality and a personality. St. Cloud Times.
The final $2 million price tag for the hospital was staggering. 2 phases of a capital campaign yielded only 0.5% of the debt. Initial enthusiasm didn't translate to financial support. Why was it necessary to build so large, so magnificently? It was the Sisters' Hospital. It was the Sisters' debt. And they shouldered the burden. Sisters working at the hospital took no salary. The Benedictines received small stipends through teaching and other jobs. These efforts helped make interest payments on the St. Cloud Hospital debt. Then, on October 29th, 1929, the U.S. stock market crashed, dragging the American economy into the Great Depression that lasted 10 years. Prioress Mother Louisa Waltz asked all of the sisters to tighten belts and sent something extra to the mother house toward the hospital debt.
The building was put up in 1928, and in order to do that, the sisters had to borrow $2 million. Now, $2 million in those days was a lot of money, probably the equivalent of $220 million today. The sisters throughout the community were being asked to cut back on everything. Do not buy any shoes unless you just possibly can outwear what you have. Cut down on the food in order to make enough money to pay off this loan.
Surgical gloves were mended, sterilized, and reused. Patients, visitors, staff, and sisters were fed with produce raised in a huge garden plot that the sisters tended. Some patients who couldn't pay their bills, especially those from rural areas, would bring produce, livestock, eggs, or dairy products as payment. There was never any question but that the hospital would find a way through the times and continue caring for anyone who needed care. In the years since, how many administrators and board members have looked back to the bold move forward that the 1928 hospital represents as they contemplated another risky step into the future? Along with the rest of the country, St. Cloud Hospital slowly regained balance, moved forward, and began to grow again. Beginning around 1946, poliomyelitis hit central Minnesota hard. The epidemic would last into the 1950s. The National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis, now called the March of Dimes, considered St. Cloud Hospital a center for polio treatment. To help combat the effects of the disease, St. Cloud Hospital hired its first physical therapist, Marion Schmidt-Becker, in 1951.
The polio epidemic was very pervasive. It was very contagious. The sisters worked long, long hours with the patients because those patients required a lot of physical therapy, exercises most of the day, it seemed. And the sisters were working with that to be able to recover from the disease.
In July 1958, a group of women who just wanted to help the hospital got together and, with the chief administrator's permission, formed the St. Cloud Hospital Women's Auxiliary. Their threefold aim was to assist where they could with the work of the hospital, sponsor projects to raise funds for the hospital's benefit, and serve as the hospital ambassadors to the local community. Within 3 years, Nurse Rosalie Timmers, an enterprising charter member, suggested that the group sponsor candy stripers, later called junior volunteers. Current volunteer numbers have grown to more than 1,200, and volunteers have remained exceedingly faithful to their founding aims. It is not possible to calculate the great good that has been accomplished through the efforts of hospital volunteers. Both the hospital and the city would be poorer without them.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
Rounding into the next decade, mighty winds of change were blowing that would have profound, far-reaching consequences for hospital care in St. Cloud. In 1962, the Benedictine community in St. Joseph voted to incorporate the St. Cloud Hospital as a separate corporation. Then, in 1964, the sisters deeded ownership of the hospital's land, buildings, and equipment to the St. Cloud Hospital Corporation for the sum of $1, launching it into the future on solid economic footing. These changes gave hospital leaders the freedom and power to invest their expertise and intelligence, their insight and imagination into meeting the region's healthcare needs. In 1966, Sister Janine Mape, the hospital's chief administrator, helped set a sound course for the hospital by leading the careful development of a strategic plan for growth. This was accompanied by a $14 million expansion and renovation program, the hospital's first major building project since 1928.
The new building campaign was on. This was a series of major building expansions that created the southwest wing, the northwest wing, and it also included building a separate convent for the sisters on the campus. This expansion of the physical plant of the St. Cloud Hospital meant expansion of services.
The expansion of services meant the hospital would venture into new territories of care. These included an inpatient mental health unit, an alcohol and chemical dependency program, an extended care and rehabilitation program, and a critical care unit. Some of these ventures were financially risky. All of them responded to serious community needs. In June 1967, Jean Bakke became St. Cloud Hospital's first lay chief administrator. Bakke's appointment was another step in opening the circle of leadership for St. Cloud Hospital.
At the time when Jean Bakke came in, one of the first things that he did was to do a reorganization of the staff. So he put in people that would be in charge of nursing and physical plant and kind of broke the duties of the hospital into categories and put a person in charge of each of those areas, which was a more organizational change than what had been prior to that. He had the legacy, I do believe, of navigating the hospital through a lot of regulations that were not in effect prior to his days.
Jean Bakke's mode of collaborative problem solving led the hospital to broaden its horizons of caregiving by opening St. Benedict's Center in 1978, dedicated to developing a continuum of care for aging people. Now called St. Benedict's Senior Community, services include long-term care, subacute care, memory care, assisted and independent living for seniors, and hub housing for seniors. Another realm of care began in the 1970s with the arrival of a young internist with training and experience in the emerging field of hematology oncology. Within just a few years, doctors were regularly referring their leukemia cases to Dr. Harold Winchell. In 1977, Dr. Winchell became part of a small group of physicians who founded the North Central Cancer Treatment Group. Based at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, the group continues to make the best cancer drugs and treatments available to patients. By 1984, a strategic planning retreat made it clear that board members, administrators, and physicians all saw the St. Cloud Hospital moving toward defining itself as a regional hospital. This tiny seed of consensus was the DNA that would direct the hospital's growth into the 21st century. When Jean Bakke announced he would step down at the end of 1984, the hospital conducted its first national search for its chief executive. Out of a pool of gifted candidates, John Frobenius emerged as the man with the skills, energy, and imagination to lead St. Cloud Hospital into the future.
John Frobenius, I happened to chair that search committee for his appointment. And when we came upon him, he was a man of great energy. I remember very, very clearly the interview we had with him. He did not sit down. He moved around through that entire interview, and he has so much energy and so many ideas of what could be done with St. Cloud Hospital and where St. Cloud Hospital would be going. So we hired him. It really became necessary for the hospital to form relationships with doctors' groups, the various clinics that were around, because we really needed to solidify the patients coming to the St. Cloud Hospital. At that point yet, people thought that if they needed really good care, they have to go to the Twin Cities. And we were beginning to say, look, we've got so much expertise here in St. Cloud. There are lots and lots of specialists. So it was a matter of getting the specialists to work with our hospital and form different kinds of relationships.
St. Cloud Hospital and the physicians who practiced there were creating relationships of trust with doctors and other healthcare professionals across the region. At the same time, St. Cloud Hospital was blossoming in its new areas of specialty care. For example, Dr. Norm Vernig was hired in 1988 as the hospital's first neonatologist, an intensive care specialist for newborns. In a year's time, he set up the neonatal intensive care unit with proper equipment and nurses specially trained to support this work. Cardiologist John Mahold, nephrologist Tom Leiter, gastroenterologist Scott Hutton, urologist John Matsura, and others like them were building clinical programs at St. Cloud Hospital, conducting outreach clinics around the region, and assuring critically ill patients that specialized care was as close as St. Cloud. Nurses and other healthcare professionals were critical in building those specialty care programs. Then Vice President of Nursing Linda Shimoleski's role expanded.
We at that time were very committed to patient-centered care, and we knew in order to accomplish that we had to bring professionals together working as a team. So my role changed at that point in time. I had been the Vice President of Nursing. At this point in time, it changed and expanded, and my responsibilities now included professionals that worked outside of nursing. And we were committed to this. We felt that if nursing, pharmacy, medicine, spiritual care, social work, to name just a few, came together and looked at the patient as a team rather than as individual professionals, that we would be much more successful in truly providing the level of care that we wanted to for our patients and grow those specialty programs. We continually evaluate what our community needs, what our patients need, are there better ways of providing the care, and we do feel confident that because of that constant evaluation and willingness to change, that we do deliver the highest standard of care.
Even as these efforts were going forward, the hospital undertook a risky venture that had been pressing for some time. A clinic for uninsured and underinsured people. The hospital opened the Mid-Minnesota Clinic in 1990. Respecting the dignity of its patients, it serves all who enter its doors and provides services to help patients find funding sources to pay for their care. In 1996, the clinic launched a family practice residency program in collaboration with the Mayo Clinic. The program is now sponsored by the University of Minnesota School of Medicine. The 1990s saw a continued growth in specialty and subspecialty medical care in St. Cloud and the region. By 1992, the heart program, begun 9 years earlier, had grown into the Central Minnesota Heart Center, performing more than 500 open heart surgeries a year, while expanding its vision, services, and reach into the region. The Heart Center recently was renamed the Centricare Heart and Vascular Center. The early 1990s also saw exponential growth in the St. Cloud Clinic of Internal Medicine, housed on the hospital campus. The growth occurred in the number of physicians and the range of specialties and subspecialties they represented. In 1995, the clinic and St. Cloud Hospital merged to form CentraCare Health System, an integrated healthcare delivery organization. The arrangement provided financial backing for expansion of services. At the same time, it provided a patient base accustomed to excellent care from physicians offering a wide range of specialized services in St. Cloud. In 2001, the system opened CentraCare Health Plaza, dedicated to outpatient services. When John Forbinius stepped down as the hospital's president and health system co-president in 2003, Dr. Terry Pladsen became the sole health system president. The board of directors entrusted the administration of the hospital to Craig Broman, who brought broad experience and deep commitment to faith-based, mission-driven healthcare.
I think I was very much aware that this organization was grounded in faith-based values and a strong mission statement. You don't find that everywhere in healthcare today, and that was certainly similar to my past of being in an organization that was very mission-oriented. So I looked forward to an opportunity to continue that kind of that philosophy of delivering care and really focusing on the needs of a community.
Broman has overseen the inauguration and growth of hospital services aimed at enhancing the quality and safety of the care patients receive, while continuing to address innumerable economic and regulatory challenges. At the same time, the hospital launched a $223 million building project. Construction began in the fall of 2008 on a 360,000 square foot wing on the hospital's southeast side. The expansion adds state-of-the-art surgical suites, increases the number of private rooms, enlarges the neonatal intensive care unit, and replaces the 25-year-old adult intensive care unit. Today, St. Cloud Hospital is a thriving regional medical center, offering a wide spectrum of programs and services. The 489-bed hospital employs nearly 4,500 people, including more than 1,400 nurses, and it benefits from the service of more than 1,200 volunteers. More than 450 physicians serve on the hospital's medical staff. As St. Cloud Hospital looks to the future, it faces an array of challenges: changing technology, rising costs of medical equipment, tighter government regulations, smaller insurance reimbursements, increasing numbers of people who need treatment but cannot pay or who are inadequately insured. How can St. Cloud Hospital address such a daunting list?
Well, we inherited the mission statement of St. Cloud Hospital, which is to improve the health and the quality of life of the people in central Minnesota in a manner that reflects the healing mission of Jesus. And so our job is really to enhance our services and our programs and our reach in central Minnesota to realize this mission statement. So I think as we continue to really carry forward that mission statement and the values of the Sisters of the Order of St. Benedict in providing healthcare to central Minnesota, we really haven't left in any way or deviated from that mission statement. We've just broadened the geographic boundaries. So I think we're well connected to our past. We're well connected to the legacy of the Sisters of the Order of St. Benedict, and I think our culture in the organization is also really enriched because of the work of our founding sisters.
The 1928 news reporter was prophetic.
Years hence, the hospital and the things that it means to St. Cloud will be an accepted fact. Those persons in St. Cloud today will recall the splendid spirit that prompted the growth and development of the hospital center, and will appreciate more deeply the years of toil and patience that made it possible. St. Cloud Times, 1928.
So that's longer than I remember, but I hope it was interesting.
When was that copyrighted?
So it's 2012. So the building is coming up on its 100th anniversary fairly soon. Centricare is coming up on its 30th anniversary in 25. So the rest of the story, we went out for a while. The Benedictine sisters invited the Centricare leaders annually to a luncheon. That hasn't happened for the last several years, but this was after this. And the archivist who succeeded Mary Schaefer talked about, so they talked about the tornado, 1886, flattened most of Sauk Rapids and part of St. Cloud. And there was a struggle at the time, as they mentioned kind of briefly, the census dropped. It was sort of an anti-Catholic time and an anti-Catholic era around the community. And they were wondering, well, you know, we don't really need a hospital in this community, and certainly not the nuns. And so the sisters started a 9-day novena to decide whether they should stay in healthcare or divest the hospital. The tornado came through on day 4 of that novena. So the cautionary tale is you better be careful when the nuns are praying what can happen. So that clearly convinced the community of the need for the hospital. And it was on the east side. That St. Raphael's is still standing there. It's a place of hope now, downtown St. Cloud. It's fascinating to me to walk into that building now at St. Cloud Hospital. These are the foundations that the sisters laid almost a century ago, and we're still using that very same building. They added on $220 million, which was about the $2 million equivalent cash that the sisters took on. And that's why they stayed, as you mentioned there, volunteered for decades being hospital staff. Nursing, they were in surgery, not doing surgery, but in the surgical suites, radiology, pharmacy, they just did everything. My mom was a graduate from the School of Nursing in 1946. The St. Cloud Hospital was so successful that they started another hospital in Ogden, Utah, the only Catholics in that whole kind of Latter-day Saints enclave around there. And that hospital is still going. My mom worked out there for a while before she was married. And It's now a community hospital, but the hospital is still functioning there in Utah. So to me, this is a fascinating kind of look at history and the roots of St. Cloud Hospital. And one of the things that we continually try to stress with the increasingly growing network that Centricare is this heritage. And Bishop Kepler is so insistent, along with Sister Susan, who's the prioress currently of this Benedictines, and worked for 30 years almost at St. Benedict's Center. The legacy of the St. Cloud Hospital is not a thing of the past. It's a gift of the present. And it's not just nostalgia that we want to keep Catholic identity alive, but because of what Catholic identity brings to healthcare. Remember the Affordable Care Act? One of my rhetorical questions was, how many times does the word love appear in the Affordable Care Act? 3,000 some pages. Any guess? 0, yeah. So Brett Reuter was the director of mission and spiritual care for a number of years at the hospital, and he was instrumental in the creation of this video. And we went to Hastings, Catholic hospital, which was looking at aligning with Alina. And they wanted to kind of a presentation on what's distinctive about Catholic healthcare. So we gave our very academic answer to that. And one of the board members, as they had table discussions, said that word love. We could have stayed home, because that's really what is distinctive about Catholic healthcare. That people experience the love of Jesus Christ through what we do. That's what's distinctive. Catholic healthcare hopefully has good clinical outcomes, excellence in our care for people, the best available technology, good clinical measures, all of those things. But what should be distinctive is that people experience God's love in an identifiable, intentional way. That's what makes Catholic healthcare distinct. And of course, we have the advantage, it's not only the Benedictines who are involved in healthcare. You can go up to Little Falls and find there the Franciscan sisters at St. Gabriel's Hospital. That's their founding. But the rule of Benedict, you see it, you saw it on the wall, the outside wall of St. Benedict's Senior Community, that all be treated as Christ. It's in the rule of Benedict, along with having the young monks not sleep with their knives, because if they have bad dreams, it's a little dangerous. That's in the rule as well. So that took longer than I thought. In the interest of time, we're not going to get through all of this, but I just want to give you a little bit of flavor then of where we will eventually go. And I'm very open to your interest, questions, where you would like to take a look. Maybe I've already answered this question a little bit from my perspective, but it's a question we constantly deal with. What do we mean by Catholic healthcare? And when I did my oral exam for this doctorate, you sit in front of all these people, and you get a week to write 2 30-page papers. So you submit 5 questions, and your team, your examining team, can take any parts of those 5 questions and combine them in any way, and then you have to write these 2 30-page papers, annotated with footnotes, whatever they come up with. And the first question turned out to be always, what is the contribution of the Catholic tradition to healthcare ethics? So you have to stop and think, what do we mean by Catholic healthcare? You can take that same question, what is Catholic education? What is Catholic social teaching? What is Catholic social ministry? What makes it distinctively Catholic? We don't have a clear answer, which is exactly as you'd expect, because Catholicism means so many rich things. The answer that I gave basically is it's guided by the Catholic moral tradition and social teaching. So what do we know? What does that mean? It's founded in the gospel. the revelation of Jesus Christ and continues the mission of Christ as guided by the Holy Spirit speaking through the magistery. And that's where the ethical and religious directives come in. They are a set of directives, guidance for making sure that the care that is provided in Catholic institutions conforms with Catholic teaching. So we'll come back a little bit to some of that history. This is from the general introduction to the ethical and religious directives of the ERD. The Church has always sought to embody our Savior's concern for the sick. Jesus' healing mission went further than caring only for physical affliction. He touched people at the deepest level of their existence. He sought their physical, mental, and spiritual healing. In faithful imitation of Jesus Christ, the Church has served the sick, suffering, and dying in various ways throughout history. The mission of Catholic healthcare is no different than that. Continue the healing mission of Jesus for the whole person. The mystery of Christ casts light on every facet of Catholic healthcare. To see Christian love as the animating principle of healthcare. To see healing and compassion as a continuation of Christ's mission. To see suffering as a participation in the redemptive power of Christ's passion, death, and resurrection. And to see death transformed by the resurrection as an opportunity for a final act of communion with Christ. It is that horizon that goes beyond the physical or the temporal existence of the person and sees each person as called to eternal life with God. And that we accompany them through all those different stages of life and even the dying process, commending them to God. We're not going to go slavishly through all of the directives one by one, but these, I think, are important for looking at what we mean by Catholic healthcare. A community that provides healthcare to those in need of it, animated by the gospel of Jesus Christ and guided by the moral tradition of the Church. You will note that, again, there's that moral guidance, but it's to all in need. And the saying goes, I have it in here later, I think it was, it's been attributed to various people who said this first, but we serve them not because they are Catholic, but because we are Catholic. And so the word Catholic means universal. We want to reach out to all, including those who have no faith, a different faith, or maybe even those who dislike our faith. But Catholic healthcare, as Christ came to redeem all, so we try to serve all. This is important. What are the boundaries of Catholic healthcare? What makes it distinctive? Well, it distinguishes itself by service to and advocacy for those people whose social condition puts them at the margins of our society and makes them particularly vulnerable to discrimination. The poor, the uninsured and the underinsured, children, the unborn, single parents, the elderly, those with incurable diseases and chemical dependencies, racial minorities, immigrants, and refugees. In particular, the person with mental or physical disabilities, regardless of cause or severity, must be treated as a unique person of incomparable worth with the same right to life and adequate health care as all other persons. This is what is put in words in the Catholic social teaching as a preferential option for the poor. Where do we get that? From Jesus himself. Whatever you do to the least, you do to me. And so Catholic healthcare is to be distinctive. And this is always that balance. So not in every state, but in Minnesota, every hospital has to be not-for-profit. And you have to show your nonprofit status by the service you give to the community. Catholic healthcare is always struggling then in the contemporary world, back to the sisters even, to balance where do we get the funds to do these things that aren't reimbursed, that don't make money? And the temptation is always to sort of trim away those parts that are not profitable and establish those services that make money. Now, so the hospital has to do everything for everybody. What a lot of these independent centers will do is take the low-hanging, profitable fruit. So you have diagnostic imaging, you have orthopedic outpatient kind of care and surgery. Those tend to be profitable, and you don't have all the overhead and the responsibilities of the overall provision of healthcare. You just take that profitable part out of the system. The hospital tries to balances its budget on some of those more profitable things, provide behavioral health services. Right now, cardiology and oncology are sort of profitable services. Behavioral health really isn't. And some of these outreach clinics for the indigent and the uninsured really aren't. This is the struggle then to balance mission and margin, as it's often called. And part of the role of the members of the corporation, the sisters who are still involved, is to sort of be the moral prodding conscience. We understand you need money, but that's not what healthcare is. It's not a business, it's a service of caring for people. And we understand the business side has to be sound, but that can't be the measure of success. So we argue with each other in subtle and polite ways. The ethical and religious directives will go into much more depth, but that's really the kind of the framework I want to spend this whole thing around, because it's a very simple but rich overview of all the different aspects of the provision of healthcare. That, of course, is of happy memory Bishop Kinney. The ERD goes back, and we'll talk a little bit about the history as we go on, but it's somewhat unique it was the first among bishops' national conferences to sort of pull together authentic, authoritative moral guidance around the provision of healthcare in one place where all the bishops agreed these are the standards that we are going to follow. And other Episcopal conferences in other countries since have adopted something like the ERD. They go to Rome to be reviewed when they're revised, so it's not merely the US bishops who are deciding these things. The Vatican also reviews them. And there's been some feedback at various times around different provisions or the wording of different provisions or things that maybe need to be strengthened in the ERD. So they provide guidance for upholding the ethical standards and address certain specific moral issues. They are not comprehensive in the sense that issues arise. One of the things that is emerging, as you well know, that the ERD do not yet provide guidance for is transgender medicine, for instance, where the social norms are changing. Things are being asked of Catholic hospitals that never had to deal with it before. The bishops don't have yet an update to the ERD that would say this is what Catholic hospitals may or may not do. So we're sort of developing that by practice. Individual bishops who will provide guidance for their own institutions or their own dioceses. And we've seen, of course, in this whole area where sometimes attempts, particularly in education, to give a framework for this have not been well received or successful. So it's taking a little time to find the most effective way. I expect eventually there to be an update to the ERD on this and other matters. The ERD, my whole point is this is a living document. It evolves and changes and is revisited by the bishops. We are on the 6th edition right now of the ERD, and this last edition, the only thing that changed was part 6, and it changed substantially about Catholic and non-Catholic institutions coming together in mergers, acquisitions, joint ventures, other ways of collaboration. As healthcare gets more complex in our at the business side, the organizational side. So the former edition of the ERD said if a Catholic hospital should align with a secular provider. Now it says when. The acknowledgement that this is almost an inevitability, right? As healthcare grows more and more into a smaller number of large national, often interstate entities, but always try and keep that Catholic identity alive. I gave you a handout that is that single page, it's back to back. It gives you just a snapshot of what Catholic healthcare looks like in the United States. 654 hospitals, that number changes a little bit every year. 135 are critical access. Critical access hospitals are those who are on a different funding mechanism. They get a cost plus 1%. And they have, generally, they're smaller hospitals with more limited services and beds, but they're in communities that otherwise would not have access to a hospital. St. Cloud Hospital or other acute care.
Onamia? Is that one of them?
What's that?
Onamia? Would that be considered one?
Yes. Yeah. In Centricare, St. Cloud Hospital is the only PPS, prospective payment system hospital. The rest are acute care. Melrose, Paynesville, Long Prairie, Sauk Center, Monticello. Who am I missing? Did I say Long Prairie?
Yep.
And then, so out west was Caris Healthcare when they aligned out in Wilmer. They're changing the name now to Centricare there as well. Rice Memorial Hospital is also a PPS or acute care hospital, but they have some outpatient clinics as well. Redwood Falls is a critical access hospital. There was a little flurry of worry there. Critical access hospitals are defined by, there's no other provider within 10 miles of another hospital. And there were some that were pretty close to that boundary. There was like 9.5 miles. Where do you draw that line? You can read the rest of these. But more than 1 in 7 patients is cared for in Catholic hospitals. 4.5 million admissions. 17 million ER visits, 500,000 babies born in a Catholic hospital, 94 million outpatient visits. So we are, the only point is, we're a significant part of the provision of healthcare in the United States. If every Catholic hospital would close tomorrow, like 15, 16, 18% of people would be without care. And Catholic hospitals often stay in communities and provide the safety net where there is no other hospital. So we provide a disproportionate share, if you will, of charity care overall nationally. And that's as it should be. No, I don't want new software. The ERD, as I mentioned, we'll finish up here. We won't get through all this, but we'll pick up next week. Are a snapshot of the moral tradition. They are not exhaustive, and you can't read them like an instruction manual for your video player. It's not all-inclusive. To interpret correctly the ERD, you have to have an understanding of the overall Catholic moral tradition of which they are an expression in a very particular set of questions. And that's why, in part, the interpretation of the ERD belongs to the diocesan bishop. Sometimes there's people like me who are consultants who the bishop might say, what do you think about this? And I can give my best educated view, but ultimately it's up to him. Yes or no? Does that accord with Catholic teaching or not? And that's in respect for the charism, not, and the bishop would be the first to say, I don't know much about this as an individual, but the charism of the magisterium, the bishops have that gift as part of the teaching authority of the church. Now, Bishop Kettler, Bishop Kinney, any bishop that I have ever met really wants to have the best input that they can get. They don't view themselves as infallible teachers. They view themselves as those who are given a responsibility that they want to exercise with care and caution and the best information that they can get. So yeah, again, the ERD will give you guidance. They are not an answer. They sort of give you principles, things to consider, things to create a boundary around what is possible. But as you know, St. Thomas Aquinas says, the farther you descend into particulars, the more uncertainty you will encounter. And so clinical cases, individual lives, people's decisions, you're not going to find, just turn to page 42 and there's your answer. But page 42 will give you the things to consider to make the best decision in accord with Catholic teaching. We'll come back to that in much more detail. And as I mentioned, they're revised as Catholic healthcare changes. So, as I mentioned, the 6th edition, chapter 6, or part 6, about the organizational health. The 5th edition, only one directive changed, Directive 58, which is about nutrition and hydration. And you can go back to the 4th edition, and you'll see there are 2 very brief sentences. In fact, I happen to have them somewhere. Here they are. So this is the 4th edition of the ERD. This is what Directive 58 said. There should be a presumption in favor of providing nutrition and hydration to all patients, including patients who require medically assisted nutrition and hydration, feeding tube, for instance, as long as this is of sufficient benefit to outweigh the burdens involved to the patient. A single sentence, 4.5 lines. The 5th edition, after, you remember Terry Schiavo? That whole case that became an international news. And the U.S. bishops wrote to Rome for a clarification on this question, got a response, and revised the ERD accordingly. Now it's this one. In principle, there's an obligation to provide patients with food and water, including medically assisted nutrition and hydration for those who cannot take food orally. This obligation extends to patients in chronic and presumably irreversible conditions, e.g. the persistent vegetative state, who can reasonably be expected to live indefinitely if given such care. Medically assisted nutrition and hydration become morally optional when they cannot reasonably be expected to prolong life, or when they would be excessively burdensome for the patient, or would cause significant physical discomfort, for example, resulting from complications in the use of the means employed. For instance, as a patient draws close to inevitable death from an underlying progressive and fatal condition, certain measures to provide nutrition and hydration may become excessively burdensome and therefore not obligatory in light of their very limited ability to prolong life or provide comfort. See the amount of distinctions that are drawn in this updated version. And to me, this is a sign or an example of the development of doctrine in our own time. So I think this is personally a great advancement in moving the focus from the technology to the patient using the technology. The earlier edition, and as it was often interpreted, was feeding tubes are always necessary. Feeding tubes are mandatory. You must feed people. And the later edition with Rome's guidance clearly says it depends on the situation of the patient. It's not about the technology as a yes or no algorithm. It's about what is the condition of the patient and would they benefit from it or not.
Do healthcare directives have any bearing on that at all?
Yes, we'll come to that. Part 3 is about, there's a section on advanced directives. It's a great question. Let me just start briefly here. So we mentioned Catholic Healthcare has this long history of the healing mission of Jesus. And hospitals, you heard Sister Miriam say, people didn't want a hospital because the hospital is where you went to die. And still people feel that way about long-term care. Often I want to go to the nursing home because everybody dies in the nursing home. And hospitals had that sense of, these are for the most desperate cases that we just want you out of your home and out of the community. This is where you go to die. They couldn't offer a lot of pure, much more care. And what we call today the specialty of palliative care is not new. It's what mostly healthcare was for many of those patients. Provide them comfort, care, to make their final passage as pain-free and as symptom-free as possible, given the resources they had at the time. 16th century, the Renaissance, of course, led to some new discoveries and approaches to disease and care. And it raised new moral issues. So if we are able to prolong life, how far do we have to go? How much can you do? How much do you have to do? What are the boundaries or limits of the application of these new emerging technologies? Even to say, maybe for your health, you should live in a warmer climate. We'll send you like Elizabeth Ann Seton's husband, William Bailey, to Italy to live. Leave behind your home and your country and maybe get better there. Not everybody could do that. Not everybody could afford that. So what are the moral obligations in things that are practically difficult, expensive, or maybe impossible? And theologians talked about this in the category called special morals, just applied moral questions. In the U.S., as we mentioned, healthcare began really with women's religious orders who were responding to a need of the time, and often to immigrant populations. Father Jimmy Joseph, any of you met Father Jimmy? Yeah. So he's of Ascension from Kerala, India. And they came here, basically. They are missionaries to us because we can no longer provide all of our own clergy. The Diocese of St. Cloud. A fantastic guy. He's the pastor. So here's this small, diminutive Indian priest. He's the pastor of Flensburg, Randall, and Sobieski. And they love him. I was up there just a few weeks ago. He had his 25th anniversary. And the place is full of people who congratulate him. But I asked him, so he came from India, what happens if you get sick in India and you can't pay? Well, what happens if you get sick? You go to the hospital. What if you can't pay? Then your family pays. What if your family pays? Then you die. There is no safety net. This is the context of a Mother Teresa, that kind of different class system and no social safety net in many parts of that country and in the world. And so the sisters really began health care as a way to serve those who had no one else to serve. And so the Irish, Germans, the Italians who came to the United States, and were often foreigners. It was an anti-Catholic time in many communities. They were not permitted to go to the public schools. There were very few hospitals at all, and they would just close their doors. So the sisters rose to that need. And you know what happened in that era. Industrialization, people left rural communities in increasing numbers and came to the city with poor working conditions, poor living conditions, poor sanitation, poor water, poor nutrition, and public health concerns. So you saw, there was just this brief mention, needs much more now. The 1918 pandemic, the sisters rose to that occasion in St. Cloud as well, and in many other places, hospitals rose to that unprecedented occasion. We had, about 1 million people in the United States died of COVID, attributed to COVID. At that time, worldwide, no one knows for sure, anywhere from 50 to 100 million people died of that influenza epidemic. It's unimaginable for us. No one had seen a cell. No one had seen DNA. No one had seen a virus. They were theoretical, but the technology didn't exist to know about any of that. They did the best that they could. And there were anti-masking protests and people who defied closures of churches and businesses and movie theaters. And it was the 1918 presidential election, and there was just a lot of, not presidential, but 1919 getting ready for the election. There was just a lot of turmoil. So healthcare at that point was largely a philanthropic exercise. It was an act of charity, service to the community. There was not Social Security, there was not Medicare and Medicaid, there was not much insurance, there was not government funding for the building of hospitals, the provision of care. It was largely a charity. And 1915, we'll stop here. The Catholic hospitalization, which is today's Catholic Health Association, began. So it's a little over 100 years old. And the idea was to unite Catholic hospitals who were facing these challenges to foster better patient care and protect the rights of Catholic hospitals as others got into this activity. And the sisters and those communities, without, again, all donor supported, were having to compete with new entities crowding that space. I suppose today we call them disruptors, like Apple, Amazon, and so on. So, just pause here. We'll pick this up next time with where the ERD first began, the first edition, and now we're to the 6th edition.